Michael Holbrook, and I'd like to welcome you to the March edition of the West Coast Chamber Advocacy and Action Breakfast. To get this thing started this morning, I'd like to say a big thank you to our ongoing Advocacy and Action sponsors, and a big shout out to Blue Cross Blue Shield and Blue Care Network of Michigan, who are our title sponsor of this program. And so we're very fortunate to have Griffin Colbini with us this morning, and he's going to give us some remarks from Blue Cross Blue Shield and Blue Care Network of Michigan.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, just keep this short and sweet. Blue Cross Blue Shield is happy to support the advocacy and action programs. Happy to support the West Coast Chamber, which of course helps fuel these. And I was thinking the other day why we support these events, and there's many reasons. One of them, though, is just that thinking around the topic of dialogue, and that dialogue is just so important for positive change, and that we need that positive change within our communities too. And in an age of social media dominated by one-sided arguments, maybe fragmented dialogue, we just think these events are so important for all of our communities. And number two, just thinking about our members and all of the people of Michigan. Blue Cross doesn't support just our members, but all of Michigan. We have a lot of programs and products that support not only our insured members, but uninsured and maybe those with no insurance, and whatever it may be. So again, we just think these advocacy and action programs are worthy events and well worth all of our time. So without further ado, I'll pass it back over to Mike, and just want to say thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Griffin. Okay, so we have a very special guest with us this morning. He's going to feel like a family friend to you, somebody that you probably have dinner with every night, and you know very well. We're very fortunate to have Rick Albin with WOOD TV, the political reporter who has been coming into our homes since, I think, Rick, you said 2002 most recently. And he's going to be taking us through what's going on from a redistricting standpoint in the state of Michigan. So every 10 years, states go through the redistricting process, and Michigan elected through a ballot initiative a few years ago to have a redistricting commission instead of elected officials go through that process. It's been kind of crazy, and it's been a dust that's just about to settle, and Rick is going to help us understand what it means for Michigan moving forward from a political district standpoint. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll put your hand up here for you.
Bring that first one up and then we'll set it up for a minute. Right, that's Conway. Yeah, that's it. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I always love coming out here, driving out this morning. It was particularly interesting because as I was coming through downtown, it was completely quiet, everything was closed, and I was looking at how much development there is, how many new places there are since I've been here, and I apologize, and I have to admit, I don't get out here as often as I have. The last 2 years, I don't get anywhere, right? So, but it was really interesting to see, and I appreciate being here to talk about an important subject. I'm glad to see so many elected officials here this morning, and as has been pointed out to me, others who would like to be elected officials. So it's good to have you all here, and I appreciate your participation. Every 10 years, there is a census, an enumeration, as it's called in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2, that laid out the idea that every 10 years we ought to figure out how many people live here. And that really goes to the idea of how we allocate hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And that's what the census is really about. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. But for my purposes, it's all about who's running in which district, when, where, how does that all play out? Now, every 10 years, whoever is in the majority in the House or Senate has been drawing these districts for as long as anybody can remember. When Democrats draw the districts, interestingly, they favor Democrats. When Republicans draw the district, interestingly, they favor Republicans. And that's a pretty simple fact. It isn't necessarily overt. It doesn't mean that there is no chance of the party that's not in power becoming in power, but there has always been the perception that because you have politicians drawing the lines in which they will be running, that they will favor themselves. So in 2018, a very well-financed group came into the state of Michigan and said, that's not what you want to do, Michigan. What you want to do is have an independent commission draw those lines. And one of the things that they did after about 2/3 of the folks voted in favor of this initiative petition, They set out their own rules, the rules that were established in that petition. And I just want to read these for you quickly before we get into looking at the new districts, because here are the criteria. Districts shall be of equal population. That's mandated by the United States, and has to become that way anyway, and the Voting Rights Act. You have some varying state seats for the House and Senate can vary a little bit more than the U.S. congressional districts, but suffice to say, it's supposed to be roughly the same size. Districts should be geographically contiguous. In other words, you can't have one piece of the district here separated by another district and then something over here. That makes sense, right? And here's where we come to the really interesting part. It says districts shall reflect the state's diverse population and communities of interest. What are communities of interest? And how would you define that? So, for example, in your current congressional district, communities of interest, if this applies, would include a good deal of the western portion here, the second district, and then this part of Kent County, because apparently this community is more interested in this community than it is the county in which it resides, right? So why does that happen? Does it happen because somebody is gerrymandering, or does it happen because of that first stipulation, district shall be of equal population? I'll give you a good example. In 2010, when they were doing redistricting, they decided that the third district, where I live, should be Kent County, Ione County, Berry County, and Calhoun County. Now, you can decide whether or not those are communities of interest or not, but those have about the right population, except that they had to have a little bit more. So they went into Montcalm County, into Greenville, and they drew a little section of lines in one township. So if you lived on this side of the street in Montcalm County, in Greenville, you would be voting in the third district, but if you lived on the other side of the street, you would be voting in the district that was up in mid-central Michigan. And the reason for that was you have to get enough people in the right district, not necessarily because that was advantageous to anybody from a political standpoint, but because you have to have the right number. So there's a reason some of these things look kind of odd as they do. So when the redistricting took place in 2020, the state of Michigan was in a pretty good situation because we've got about 190,000 more people than we did 10 years ago after the Great Recession. So we rebounded a little bit there, but we still lost one member of Congress. And why is that? Not because we need less population, but because population is starting to center in other places, and they gained enough population to get another member of Congress. I think at one time, anybody help me out, we had as high as 22 members, 21 members, something like that. And we have steadily lost representation in Washington every 10 years because the population shift, not just losing population. Again, in the past few years, we've actually gained, but population growing in other places. And think about Arizona and Colorado and states to the west and to the south where people are largely moving. Quick story, last summer I had a great opportunity to take my kids, my family on a trip, and we went out west. And we went to Zion and Bryce and Yellowstone, and each time we would go into one of these western states, you would see a sign or a bumper sticker, and it would say, "Don't California, Montana. Don't California, Idaho." Because the migration out of California, which also lost a member of Congress in this last census, is going into these other places. And some of these places that have been quiet and almost ignored are suggesting, don't bring whatever it is that they don't want from those states into their state. So all of that continues to mean that other states are starting to grow, and we as an average population are not doing such. So we will now be down to 13 congressional districts. This map represents 14 congressional districts. See if I can navigate to the other. So we were going to lose one member. It was here. Yeah, good. It's the days redistricting. And that's about the extent of my computer knowledge. I have a 13-year-old son. I don't have to do anything. So we were going to lose one member of Congress to get it up, we actually are going to have 3 sitting members, thank you, 3 sitting members who will not be returned. And the reason is, one is decided not to run again over from Southfield. 2 Democrats on the east side, 2 current sitting Democratic members of Congress will be running in the primary. And you may have heard there'll be 2 Republican sitting members of Congress in what is the new 4th district that will be running against each other. So when we go back in Washington in December or in January, we'll only have 13 members, but there will be 3 current members that will not be returning. So that means you'll have somewhat of a loss of representation from the standpoint that you won't have the same type of seniority in Washington that we do right now. Let's go to the new congressional map. So you know roughly what the old one looked like. And this is thank you, just a second. I'd like to expand this. That's what you wanted to talk about, right? Yeah. This looks more familiar. Yeah, it takes a second. Okay, we're not in Kansas anymore. So if you look at the new districts, it's a little bit difficult. First of all, let me tell you that during this process, I attended some of the independent commissions meetings. I watched many more of them on the Zoom link. And I personally got 2 different programs and tried to draw these lines myself. And it is immensely difficult because you have to get down to the township level and sometimes below that. And you've already seen my expert computer skills, so in doing this, you have to be really precise about how you draw these lines. So it isn't easy work to do. But I will tell you that I always started with the 1st congressional district, right? Because obviously all of UP is going to be contained within a district. There are actually more people that live below the bridge than above the bridge in the 1st district now. And you can see how they ultimately, I always try to keep the line to go straight somewhere. Very difficult to do. So what was the 2nd district where you have lived for the last 10 years is now going to become this 4th district down here. The 2nd district shifts, maintains part of the old 2nd, and becomes this kind of central part of Michigan. The current congressman from the Midland area is moving into the 2nd district, and we'll see how that race shapes up there. The 3rd district, again, which used to be from Kent County to Ione County to Berry down to Calhoun County, has shifted and takes in part of Ottawa County now. This is the district where Peter Meyer currently serves, and so this district and goes up and takes up Muskegon as well. So that changes the dynamic of that. And then the 4th district, where Congressman Heisinger lives and Congressman Upton live, and that sets up 2 incumbents there. And then down this district down here, where Upton's district had gone all the way, this now stretches from one side of the state to the other side of the state. So what that means is you've got to jump, right? And so I should point out that every 10 years there is a census. Every 10 years the lines are redrawn. Every 10 years people are unhappy. It happened this year, it happened 10 years ago, and 10 years before that. So this is not new. It's just new about being unhappy. So this is the congressional picture. This is the easiest thing that we can talk about this morning, because if we go back to the other redistricting, it gets even more complicated. Senator Victory, for example, represents all of Ottawa County. Is that right, Roger?
A beautiful area.
Well, not anymore. If I can get to the Senate maps. And it does take this moment to load. So what has happened, put this down for just a second. So if we look at the way the districts are drawn now, if I'm correct, this is going to be the western half of Ottawa County. I assume
That's correct.
that's where you're going around. So this district used to take in all of this, right?
All of Ottawa County.
Right, all of Ottawa County. So now that 30th district, which is the old 28, I think, is going to be in part of eastern and north central and across in Kent County. This is kind of the heart of Grand Rapids area here. This district runs all the way down from Lawton, all the way up to southern Kent County. This one runs all the way from below Battle Creek all the way up to Lowell. This district goes from Portland across northern Kent County and all the way up to Irons.
And it includes a little bit of Ottawa County.
Yes,
Chester County.
that's right. It does, except a little bit of Ottawa. So the districts, and again, it talks about communities of interest. And I don't know how you define that. I don't know how the commission defined it. I don't know how you would define it. But I can only say this, looking at it as the most objective way I can, is that this is one of the most significant recalibrations of districts that I have seen since I have been here. This would be my third redistricting, I guess. And it's going to change things. If we went on down to the House level, that changes too. And it changes all of these counties, all of these districts. It's not to say that those changes are inequitable or aren't doable. It's just to say they look a whole lot different than they ever have before. And that's going to make things change, not just for the people that are running for office, but for you. I mean, how many of you are, and I expect everybody here to be, how many of you are certain what your new district looks like and who you'll be voting for? Good. My work here is done. And that's just the point. And look, every 10 years that happens, okay? But not with the dramatic impact that it's had this time. And so I don't know if I'll be reporting politics long enough to be able to take that big rear view look to see if this was a good thing, a bad thing, a neutral thing, but it's a thing. And it's where we are now, and it's going to be really interesting. And for the first time, I can't tell you this, I started covering politics in 1995. I left for a couple of years, came back. So for at least 27 years, I have been covering and watching politics here in West Michigan. And this is the first time that I can't take a look at the map and say, well, once the primary is over, these races are done. Because in a lot of cases, you could do that in the past. Some of it will still be true, except that they haven't been tested. I don't know what the demographics look like. I know what they look like on a computer, but I don't know who votes. I don't know what the proclivities of those areas is going to be. So for the first time, instead of covering 6 or 8 or 10 House races, 3 or 4 Senate races, I may have 22 House races that I have to cover with some intensity, and maybe 10 Senate races that I have to cover, and 5 congressional races, and oh, by the way, there's a race for governor, and all of the others. This is going to be a really intense political year, at least for those of us who have to cover it closely. For those of you who have to participate, you're going to have to pay really close attention because there's a lot going on. I think we're going to take some questions.
Yes.
because I know I got a hard out here, and I'm in television, I know what that means.
Any questions for Rick?
But not about Kansas.
I was gonna say, will you pull up the house?
Sure.
Map as well, just because there's so many.
If I can. Yeah, just go back one, and then you can pull it up. Now, the house maps are really interesting because, generally speaking, and house members correct me if I'm wrong, they're usually pretty compact, normally contained within a county. And now the way some of them have been drawn, thank you for that. So, and it's, part of the problem is all of these maps go out into the lake, which is not helpful. If there's anybody voting out here, I'm concerned. But you can see how they kind of cut these out. For example, I'm trying to think where I am here. So I think, like in the 90, expand that just a little bit. What I'm doing this, does anybody else have questions? Because I can.
Yeah, so the commission that put this together, there was an equal number of Republicans and Democrats, and then a couple of independents. Is that how the breakup was?
There were equal number of Republicans and Democrats and more independents, if memory serves me correctly. Here's part of the problem. In this state, we don't register as Republicans or Democrats. Some of the criteria included shouldn't really have been involved in politics over a period of time previous, holding office, running for office, working in Lansing, for example. So I would submit it's a little hard to know what people's proclivities are other than how they self-identify. And it was a process where a bunch of people, all of you, could send in your application to be there, and then they did a blind drawing, and then they submitted to folks. They had some switch outs. Look, this independent commission had a big learning curve. I mean, it's tough enough if you've been there and you've done it before. And I would submit, we want to get into term limits, but I would submit in a time of term limits, when you have members of the House and Senate redrawing those lines, it may be the first time for them too, right? So it's a big task, but I trying to give you the best take on these House seats. Again, 89 is going to be where you're running. 85 is going to be where you're running. 84 is going to be city of, is that right? Or
I think was the Mark Hackman's district, but.
yeah, you're right. That's back over to Kent County. So 80, yeah,
86 is a little lower.
right.
It's our issue.
So, yeah, here, right, because there's Manhaven, so this will be Holland. So we move that up just a little bit. So the idea is that these districts, one of the things I will say about the Senate districts and some of the House districts is, depending on how you view it, most areas, most counties are going to have more representation, more members that represent individual parts of the county, even though they may represent multiple counties. You're going to have more individuals within that framework that you could go to and say, hey, this is what we need here. There may be some value in the idea that you have more representation in Lansing, even though they're representing people in other areas too, if that makes any sense. Any other? Yes, sir.
Where are we at with the lawsuits? Are those all settled?
Well, they're not all settled, but the filing deadline is 30 days from now, less than 30 days, 19. And the elections are going to go on, right? So unless there is some really monumental movement on the part of some court somewhere, it seems pretty unlikely that this is going to get changed. And even if there was some action to get it changed, I mean, we're going to lose a number of counties. So when we vote in November, we will vote on 13 members. We have to have those lines established. And as far as I know, any of the cases that have been heard so far have been heard without.
Rick, question for you. So if you worked for the Republican or the Democrat Party before this, the consensus, I think, was, generally, the previous districts, there was some structural advantages built in for the Republican Party, give or take. What would you take me on these new maps? What do you think in terms of balance of power? Is this going to have an influence on that or not?
Well, first, to the assumption that there were structural advantages, that's probably true to a certain point. But people tend to congregate in like masses. So if there are a whole bunch of Republicans that live around Ottawa County, I'm not shocked. If there are a whole lot of Democrats that live around Lansing or around Detroit, I'm not shocked. I mean, that's kind of the way we congregate to some degree. But in redrawing the lines, have they made it more possible for there to be more competitive districts? I believe they have. I can't say that with certainty because, again, they haven't been tested. I know what the numbers look like, but who votes? Who do you get out? What do those areas look like? Are areas that have been traditionally Democratic areas going to start voting largely Republican or vice versa? I doubt. But there could be some more competitive districts. And I think even on the previous map, that senatorial map, I wouldn't, but I think I could, point to a district or two that could be more competitive than they have been in the past.
Rick, this has been very informative.
I'm done.
Once again, Rick, thank you very much for making time for us. We appreciate it. At this time, I'd like to invite our state legislators up in front. Senator Roger Vickery is with us this morning, and State Representatives Brad Slav and Newman. Unfortunately, State Rep Mary Whiteford had something come up, so was not able to join us this morning. So if you guys want to consolidate, there we go. So I'll kick it off with a question, and then we'll open it up for questions. Senator Vickery, you have been working diligently with Jennifer Owens at Lakeshore Advantage and Chamber, and working on some legislation to help our ag community and also some local food processors. Can you talk to us a little bit about the bill that you just put forward?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I'd just like to look at this audience here. And Senate Bill 885 is very pertinent to a lot of these faces I see out in this audience. The genesis of Senate Bill 885 came about through a number of years of working in Lansing. And some of the frustration I saw in Lansing, because we get used to doing the same old thing. We had an opportunity with a lot of federal dollars coming in through the CARES Act, also federal infrastructure dollars coming in. And I felt we need to flip the script because we demonstrated in Lansing that we saw an issue in the mobility industry. We were able to address that in a 21-day period of time. And yet, certain parts of our community, I call our hometown communities, our rural communities, which have been neglected for the last 3 decades, where is their seat at the table? So the Senate Bill 885 was able to frame the need of our rural and hometown communities and address these dollars that we have available, one-time transformational dollars, and invest into this infrastructure. And lessons learned from COVID, we saw supply chain issues, we saw processing issues. The biggest I think a big frustration was of the residents of the state of Michigan was with Michigan's agricultural diversity, they saw the product out in the field. They might have been grazing the field or maybe growing ripe crops, but yet there's empty shelves on the grocery shelves in the stores. Why was that? And that's where we started listening. We started taking input and discovered we need additional investment into our processing in our hometown communities, and also even at the distribution level. So with it, it's a comprehensive bill of fairly large sum of money, $1.4 billion. That's usually a lot of federal terms, but this is a big number for Lansing. And moving this forward, and we have had very good, strong, robust testimony in subcommittees, We have a number of stakeholders here that actually do have some letters of support, because we work hard in the Senate. We have a number of co-sponsors in the Senate side, even some, we have buy-in from the leadership, because for a subcommittee chair to have a hearing, you definitely going to have some, oversight and approval from our leadership team. But we also have colleagues on the House side, and that's where I need to work with administration and our friends on the House to, as all these proposals come forward, make sure we do not neglect our hometown communities and our rural communities, and making sure that we grow Michigan. And also, as we go through these economic cycles, what industry is recessionary proof? And that is our ag processing and that processing industry. And that's why I am going to push hard, show that leadership, and continue with your help, with House help, and with administration, move our rural and hometown communities forward. And again, I would appreciate if those can sign up on letter of support. Many hands make light work.
And just speaking in our chamber footprint here, groups like Request Foods, for example, and other Ilmark or not Sara Lee. Sara Lee, I mean, we're talking just alone in Ottawa County, nearly a potential of $1 billion of investment coming in. But what restricts that is that processing, the water processing. Now, we're going to get a little bit in the weeds here, but it's difficult. So why is government getting involved in this component? No, let the private sector handle that. Well, you can secure lending very easily on a processing plant, increasing your robotic line, or how, as you can show that return on your investment on that area. But try to borrow $35 million for a water treatment plant. What lending institution wants to help you on that? So what's your return on investment? What type of revenue does process, and we can use some non-colorful terms to describe what a water treatment plant does. But how do you find that financing? And typically you have your local municipality do that processing. But when it comes to ag processors, their demand on that local infrastructure is huge. And I can go over some specific examples right here in Ottawa County. And then we've at the state level been ad hoc, $1 million here, $2 million there, $3 million there, and we still don't solve the issue. So my attempt, and with hopefully the help of the House and the administration, flip the script on that, take a holistic approach on it, instead of this piecemeal, and get this issue solved. Because one thing about Michigan, we have the blue economy, the water, compared to other states. So forward-looking, we can work with it. The mobility industry, which we demonstrated, and I'll take the lead on that, but also I think we can take the lead on this processing and blue economy that we have to offer in the state of Michigan, and set the state of Michigan up in a fantastic position in the next decade and 2 decades, and invest in those communities that have been neglected in the last 30 years. Any questions for Senator Victory on that particular topic? So, Representative Slaw, I'll turn it over to you to give us an opportunity to weigh in on some things that you've been up to, and then we'll dive into same thing with Representative Bierman, and then go into some specifics.
All right, can do that. So I've got a couple of bills that I've been working on. One is actually is in front of the governor right now. It was 5252, which is a petition signature initiative, so that if we talked about the petition drive that got us to the redistricting voting the way that we've done. This would say that the Secretary of State, as we generate a petition signature drive like that, has to put on a website what is the status of it, give us an overview of what it is, and then every 30 days, at least every 30 days, has to do some sort of an update for where is it in the process of moving forward. And in a politically charged year, to be able to get something to go through the House, Senate, and have the governor sign is an interesting process. I believe this is one that's actually going to make that work. One of the other ones that might influence or have an impact on some of you is our licensing and regulation authority here in the state, LARA, has required that if you're going to get a professional license, any kind of professional license, you give them your cell phone number, your address, your email address, all that information. Well, the interesting thing we found out is that they're actually selling that to other people. So they're actually profiting on you turning in your information about licensing. And so I've got a bill out there to try and stop that so that If they want to give it away, that's one thing, but I can't stomach that they're selling that information to other people. So we're trying to see if we can stop that. And with that, I'll pass it to.
And as we pass it down to Representative Bierman, the work you're doing on the ballot initiatives is very important. In this particular year, I believe 17 ballot initiatives currently in some form of working its way through the process. So it's going to be very important to go figure out what the status of those is. Representative Bierman.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very grateful for Senator Vickery for the work you're doing there with rural infrastructure. For instance, Swanson Pickle, I think it's the third largest pickle grower, anyway, nation known as well, wants to do final processing, but they don't have a way to get their wastewater taken care of. So hopefully through this mechanism we can find a way to make that happen and get more final processing here. A couple things to hit on. I want to go back to the school safety task force I talked a little bit about here a month ago. You're going to see a preliminary report coming out from us soon, maybe even this week, I think for sure by next week. Not a final report, but just kind of a status update. And I think, we're leaning towards a risk assessment at the school level, kind of a third party, someone who doesn't sell you something, to help the schools decide where they are with basically school hardening and preparedness, school safety plan, all that kind of stuff. And, but I think, again, back to what I said a month ago, is I think our biggest need, our biggest opportunity is in the school mental health world, and how do we help encourage support for those kids? And we've all got examples of how things are seeming to fall rather quickly for those kids, and the support not there for them, and some real mental health. Frankly, I think COVID has driven that to an extreme as well. So we're looking at how is that information shared, where are the parents' involvement in that sharing information. What I mean by that is, from the hospital to the school to the outside counselor. And again, it's got to be driven by the parental permission on that. But there are so many dots that can be connected that could be very helpful for those kids. And also in the training arena, everything in life ends up at school for these kids. And we are asking more and more and more of the schools to be that bastion of kind of changing the world around them, and away from the idea of education. Now they're helping to feed kids, and of course the mental health problems are there. So how can we help the employees that are there be prepared to be that support for the kids? And what does that training look like, and how they get up to speed from the bus driver all the way to the teacher? Again, I know we're expecting more and more from them, but these situations are arising and they are ending up there. So look for some, I think, serious bills. We've also got a 2018 school safety report from back in Snyder's days. There was six recommendations, and we've already got bills on those. Some of them are as simple as, what is a lockdown? We have, like, our deputy sheriff here in Ottawa County says, if I go from one school to the next, I'm not sure what that means when they say partial lockdown, soft lockdown. Can we give a definition to that across Michigan, so that when law enforcement shows up or anybody hears about it, they know what that means? And then one last thing, I don't know if I got into this last time, but just rules review process, something I'm passionate about. We introduced a bill a couple weeks ago, looking to get 20% of our rules and regulations reviewed by each department every year. So every 5 years, they would all be reviewed. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is, can we streamline parts of government? Because this does affect businesses. It does affect businesses choosing to come to Michigan or not, depending on how cumbersome they feel the process is for them to get their licenses and work with many of our departments in the state. So those are a couple things I want to throw out.
Thank you very much. Anybody in the audience have a question for any of our Senator or representatives this morning? Yes, sir.
Had the opportunity this morning to talk to Senator Vickery, thanks to Dennis bringing it up, about hatcheries in single-time investment to bring hatcheries into the current state, and really lay something out for decades to come. Roger, you mentioned, money's coming in and investing in rural and small town stuff. At our table this morning, we were talking about infrastructure, i.e. high-speed internet. And when I think of rural and I think of smaller town, I'm going, high-speed internet's something we all need, right? I don't know if there's something slated, there was some talk about it, that is really going to impact the state on the high-speed internet thing and pushing it further out into rural and smaller communities.
Well, I definitely appreciate bringing that subject up. One is the fisheries, serve on that budget. Chair Bumstead is the chair of that, serve on the subcommittee. That's where we can create more efficiencies, a lot of overhead costs, motors, energy costs, those areas, shore that up once an opportunity lifetime to make that happen, grow that recreational revenue that we have in the state. Remember, we have manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism. That fits in that tourism, and also invest in the rural hometown communities. When you also talk about broadband, I just thank you, that's part of SB 885 too, $100 million for rural broadband. This is why SB 885 is a comprehensive bill. It covers a lot of these categories, because we can get broadband brought into the hub or the core of the community, but those outliers, so basically you got the trunk coming in, but that web, how we get that facilitated out, and there's a lot of additional costs. So we're in robust discussion with those providers, and making sure how we can fit that in the final package of SB 885, and that's part of our hometown and rural communities too.
So this is a question for all three of you that have asked you to weigh in on. So, I don't know if you filled up your car recently, but it's a little more expensive than it was before. Really? Just a titch. And the Senate and the House passed some legislation that was going to eliminate or postpone the fuel tax, and the governor said she's not supportive of that because that money's earmarked for roads, but she is open to the idea of possibly doing a sales tax holiday. Can we talk a little bit about, provide a little more insight on that and how you feel about that approach?
I'll let my House members, I've been doing a lot of talking. Brad, opportunity for you.
We did pass, both the House and the Senate passed, that we would eliminate the sale or the gas tax, which was 27.2 cents. Right after or right about the same time, the governor had sent to the federal government that we would, that she was proposing that they reduce their gas tax of 14 cents. So we thought this was probably a better idea. It gave more break to our citizens and was for a 6-month time frame, to your point, rather than indefinitely. It's how do we do that? And we have the additional dollars here in the state because of all of the money that's come through over the last few years. We've got roughly $4 billion sitting in escrow that needs to be used. We figured we could use that to offset that road funding during that time frame, be able to make that all work pencil correctly. We will continue to need to figure out ways to try and do something like that. I don't think the governor will sign the bill that we sent, even though she still has the opportunity. We'll just have to see where we can go from there.
Would you be supportive of her proposal in eliminating the sales tax instead of the fuel tax?
You know, so the sales tax supports our schools, right? So we now have that drives a wedge into other places. So everything that we do has some sort of ripple effect. What ripple do you want to attack, and how big a wave do you want to ride?
Representative Newman, here to weigh in?
Yeah, we are at the state level, the federal level, sitting on more tax revenue than we've ever seen in the past. And that's not going to be forever, I understand that. I guess, the sales of the gas tax, removing that isn't probably my favorite tax break, but it was a way for us to put $760 million back in the citizens of Michigan's pocket. And as we sit here looking at this surplus, my first priority is to say, how can we set ourselves up long-term where Michigan is a place where people want to be? And I think a tax structure that is one of the very biggest issues that people look at. So I would like to see some long-term tax change, but I am in support of what we sent to the governor. We did not include in there that we were going to backfill it, and so, you know, her comments about, well, then we're going to lose it for roads, is technically true, but we would have backfilled it. I think everybody can see that, and for me, that's a perfect way to get money back into people's pockets. And as far as her tax plan, I think, honestly, I think it's her trying to regain that narrative that, you know, this is her idea. So, we'll probably get something across the table, but my hope is that we get some real long-term tax reductions, whether it's in, you know, income tax or something like that. That's where my heart really is.
Well, would you amend the bill to say that that amount of money will be backfilled by that $4 billion that's sitting there, or whatever portion of it that we need? Would you amend the bill to do that instead of backfilled?
That's a possibility. I don't sit in leadership to say whether or not that's going to happen.
Any other questions on that particular topic?
Maybe not a question, but a comment. And Luke, I appreciate your vantage point, because quite frankly, whether it's sales tax or gas tax, in my opinion, Putin's going to control more of our purse strings than what we're talking about here for a temporary reprieve. And a year from now, nobody's going to remember what we did, because it'll be back in 6 months. It's temporary, it's temporary. Better to do something that is long-term, better structure, looking forward to the short term.
That's where I believe that we need to invest in our energy infrastructure, becoming energy reliant in Michigan and throughout our nation, and making sure that we have sound regulation. I have some frustration with Eagle and the timing of permit. Now we have, as highlighted, we live in a community that possesses the world's freshwater basin. So we have to be very conscientious of preserving that wonderful resource, because that's how we build our economy. But we can do that and protect that resource and continue to explore for energy if we do it in a safe manner, which we've demonstrated, but we've just got to get those permitting processes going. Denial by delay is not an option. I see this administration using that technique. They don't deny it, but they just delay it. And I think that's something not just alone in the state of Michigan, but nationally. And that way we can become energy independent in this nation, not be held hostage by foreign entities. And you can see it's a crazy world out there, and we don't want to be held hostage by crazies. But we can do it in a sound, environmental way. We can learn from our mistakes of the past, and that has to go hand in hand with also tax policy.
Representative Slaw and Representative Bierman, you both have been working on various forms of criminal justice reform. Do you have any updates for us on any of those activities that you've been working on lately?
I'm excited to see one thing that might be flying a little under the radar for criminal justice reform, and it probably is just a little one step outside, but at the end of the day, it can help hundreds of thousands of people here in Michigan, and that's the central registry reform. Several bills that went through the House with all yeas, and then came out of Senator Vickery's Judiciary Committee just, I think, 2 weeks ago. It's now on the Senate floor, but central registry is what churches go to and schools go to check to see if you can be around kids. There's 470,000 people in Michigan on there, and the interesting thing to know about that is that basically you have to be a parent to get on that list. So it's your child, CPS comes to your home, and they kind of investigate things. And so that's how you end up on there. So that means that 470,000 people are parents. They're not everybody in Michigan, and so that's 10% of Michigan parents. The point is, we want to make sure that people on this list are people that shouldn't be around kids, not just somebody who fell asleep on their couch and somebody goes out. The kid goes across the street. And I think we've made a good balance there. And the interesting thing is we've also asking that the convicted child abusers be added to that list. So I think you'll see a group of people come off that list that probably shouldn't be there. You know, frankly, some of these people have gotten their kids back. And so that means that in the CPS world, they're probably not endangering kids anymore. And we did leave some language in there so that LAR can continue to see the same as law enforcement with the expungement process. Law enforcement can continue to see and look back. So they'll be able to look at, you know, do I want to open a daycare? Did you have some charges in the past? They can take that into consideration again, because there's different levels of, you know, for instance, if I want to open a daycare, you probably should be for sure that, you know, you're not going to be a danger to children. But if you're going to go volunteer at soccer camp, you know, that's a little different story. So I'm excited about that, and I do think the pretrial bills are also out there. I did introduce a couple felony firearm bills, and to not to take up too much time, but it is involving the use of a firearm. So number one, you have to be charged with an initial felony, and then if it's a firearm in play, then you could get a second felony firearm. That's what felony firearm is. And so what the bills that I introduced with a Democratic colleague in the House say is that if the gun was not brandished or used in the commission of the crime, it can't be a mandatory 2-year sentence. So we're trying to change that, give the judges discretion if the gun was not brandished or used in the commission of the crime. And there's kind of a long story about how that might occur, but there are some cases if it's in the glove box or it's in a different room, but it was never used in the commission of the crime. And that's where I want to give the judges discretion again to decide what the term should be, not leaving it a mandatory 2-year.
Thank you very much for that update. Unfortunately, as it happens since every month, we run out of time again. So just as a preview of coming attractions, some of you may have seen Holland City Manager Keith Van Beek on the news recently about exciting things going on in the city of Holland, and we're fortunate that Mayor Box will be with us next month, giving us an update on the city of Holland. We'll also be hearing from Dave Coster with Holland DPW to give us an energy update in the local community as well. So great conversation. And as always, we're joined by our state legislators as well. So appreciate you being here. Look forward to seeing you all in April. Have a great week.